There is a stigma around STIs. Even with perfect hygiene, people are still getting UTIs. Especially Black women have been subjected. They've been used, they've been studied, they've been cut open and experimented on without consent. Period pain is normal, but period pain that interferes with your daily life is not. What if the reason you haven't gotten answers isn't because your body is broken, but because the system was never built to listen to you? Welcome to G Chats. Hi everyone, welcome back to G Chats with your host Gianna Jara here in the G Spot. I'm so happy to have you guys here today. I'm very comfy and cozy for today's episode. I'm on my period. I am excited for today's episode. When you guys see this, I believe it'll be a few days before June 19th. And June 19th is really special in the United States because it is also known as Juneteenth, which is a holiday that commemorates the end of slavery in the United States. And every year around this time, I find myself thinking about the systems that survived slavery, not because slavery still exists in its original form, but more because institutions don't magically rebuild themselves overnight. And I feel like if any of you are not from the States, a lot of people don't realize how deep racism runs in so many different systems in the United States, and slavery very much, again, not in its original form, persists in so many systems. They carry history with them, they carry assumptions with them, they carry biases with them. And one of the places where I think that I personally can still see the fingerprints of that history is in medicine, but specifically gynecology, which is my area of expertise and my field as a biomedical engineer who studies female reproductive health. And as women, many of us are very familiar with something like medical misogyny. We know what it's like to have our pain dismissed. We know what it's like to be told that symptoms are normal when something is clearly not, and we know it deep within our core. We know that something feels wrong. We know what it's like to leave an appointment feeling unheard. We know what it's like to spend years searching for answers while being told that you need to relax, or being told that you just need to lose weight or reduce stress, or just wait and see what happens. Whether it's about conditions of endometriosis, adenomyosis, PMOS, pelvic floor dysfunction, autoimmune diseases, infertility, or chronic pain conditions, women have been telling medical systems for a very long time that something is wrong with the way that our symptoms are often evaluated. But one of the questions I've found myself asking over and over and over again since becoming a biomedical engineer, and even during my time studying to be a BME, is if all women are navigating the same healthcare system, why do some women consistently experience worse outcomes than others? And the reason that this comes up is because when researchers look at maternal mortality, chronic pain, reproductive health outcomes, fibroids, and so many other areas of medicine, there's a pattern that emerges. Black women are often experiencing worse outcomes than white women. And what becomes even more interesting is that those disparities do not disappear when we compare women with similar incomes, with similar education levels, or even similar access to healthcare. So I hope that everyone understands what I mean when I say that. When you put women of different races at equal playing fields and other factors are evened out, have a Black woman have higher income and higher education levels than a white woman, the Black woman is still more likely to have worser outcomes than the white woman. So what explains that? So to answer that question, I think that we have to start talking about the history of gynecology itself, because as a BME, one of the things that frustrates me and also fascinates me about science is that it's supposed to be self-correcting. And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this enough, that science is supposed to be self-correcting. The entire purpose of science is to identify flawed assumptions and replace them with better ones. Every single scientific breakthrough is essentially a correction, believe it or not. We discover something that we thought was true isn't true, and then we adjust our understanding of the world, right? That's how science works. So when I talk about racism in medicine, I don't think that this conversation is ultimately about politics. I think it's about science. Specifically, it's about what happens when scientific institutions are built on assumptions that were never scientifically valid in the very first place. So many people have heard of the names James Marion Sims. He's often referred to as the father of modern gynecology, and for decades, medical textbooks celebrated him for developing surgical techniques to repair vesico-vaginal fistulas, which is essentially a devastating childbirth injury that can leave women incontinent and socially isolated. But what many people don't learn in schools, right? They'll learn about James Marion Sims, but they don't learn about Anarcha. They don't learn about Lucy. And they don't learn about Betsey, 3 enslaved Black girls whose bodies became central to James Marion Sims' experiments. And I just want to pause for one moment and highlight, I just said girls, not women. Girls. That was not a mistake. That was just not used like, oh, I'm casually talking. That was intentional. Girls. These are girls that we are talking about. So history often refers to them as women, but many historians believe that they were likely teenagers. And I believe that there's enough evidence that suggests that they were teenagers, which is why I refer to them as girls, to not ignore that. But regardless of their exact ages, they were young people that were living under slavery. They could not meaningfully consent. They did not have bodily autonomy, and their ability to refuse participation was essentially non-existent because they were considered property under the law. So think about that for a moment. Like, imagine being a young girl who survives childbirth under unimaginable circumstances. Imagine suffering from a painful and life-altering fistula, and then imagine being subjected to repeated experimental surgeries with no meaningful ability to say no. So when we talk about medical history, there's often a tendency to focus exclusively on the physician, the innovation, and the discovery, as well as the advancement. But every advancement has a history, and every advancement has a human cost. And I think part of honoring history means telling the entire story and not just the parts that make us comfortable. The surgeries themselves are important to discuss, but what I find more important are the beliefs that allowed them to happen, because Sims was not operating in a vacuum. And I feel like a lot of people hear that and don't know what that means. He was a product of his time. I think that's important to acknowledge. And his time was shaped by deeply racist beliefs about biology. You're probably looking at me like, Gianna, what were the racist beliefs about biology? Well, for centuries, there was this widespread belief that Black people were biologically different from white people in ways that made them more capable of enduring pain. Some physicians actually claimed that Black people had less sensitive nervous systems. Others argued that they were naturally more resilient to suffering. These ideas were then used to justify slavery, forced labor, medical experimentation, and unequal treatment. And today, those claims sound absurd. They do, because they are. They're literally absurd and false. There's no biological framework to explain a Black woman being able to tolerate labor pain more than a white woman, or being able to be cut open, have her pelvis cut open, and tolerate that pain more than a white woman, more resistant to pain than any other woman on this planet. There is absolutely no scientific basis for the idea that Black people experience less pain than white people. But what becomes unsettling is realizing that false ideas do not always disappear the moment that science disproves them. History does not have to be alive to leave fingerprints. And in 2016, researchers actually published a study that was showing that some medical students and residents still endorsed false beliefs about biological differences between Black and white patients. Some believed Black people's skin was thicker. Others believed Black people had less sensitive nerve endings. These myths have been scientifically disproven for decades, yet remnants of them persisted in medical training environments. Think about it. These are literally people who, medical students and residents, like people who are going to be future physicians, future healthcare workers, who are holding false beliefs in pain perception towards Black people. That should concern all of us. You, me, literally everyone. That should concern all of us. Not because it means that every single provider is racist, but because it demonstrates how deeply ideas can become embedded within systems. And the medical system is just one that I'm highlighting because this is the area that I work in. Bias doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears as assumptions. Sometimes it appears as shortcuts. And sometimes it appears as whose symptoms are investigated aggressively and whose symptoms are dismissed and ignored. And this is where history stops being a history lesson and it starts becoming a modern healthcare conversation. Because when we look at maternal mortality within the United States, for example, the disparities are impossible to ignore. Black women are significantly more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And what is particularly important is that this disparity, as I mentioned earlier, does not disappear when we compare women with higher incomes and advanced education. So in other words, money alone does not solve the problem. Education alone does not solve the problem. Access alone does not solve the problem, because I hear a lot of times, especially from racist people, they will say, well, if a Black woman is low income and doesn't have an education, all she has is a GED, she's going to have poor access to healthcare. So of course, that's going to impact the care that she receives and put her at a greater risk of health disparities or worser outcomes because she's receiving worse care because she's low income and uneducated. That's what a lot of racist people believe. And honestly, even uneducated people on this topic believe that. But research shows us that if you take a Black woman and you find a Black woman who has higher income and higher levels of education, a PhD for God's sakes, you give her the highest level of education and you put her up against a white woman who has lower income and lower education, the Black woman is still more likely to experience worse outcomes. That literally tells us, that reality literally challenges a narrative that many people are comfortable believing. And it's that healthcare disparities are simply the result of socioeconomic differences. And those factors, they matter to an extent. Poverty does impact health. Access does impact health. Education impacts health, yes, but they do not fully explain what we see. One of the most famous examples of this is Serena Williams. And I really wanted to mention this because I feel like not enough people know about this or even talk about this. Serena Williams is arguably one of the greatest athletes in history. She had access to the most elite healthcare systems. She had resources, she had knowledge, she understood her own body. And after giving birth, she recognized symptoms of pulmonary embolism because she had experienced one before. So she had told healthcare providers what she believed was happening, and initially she was not taken seriously. And thankfully, Serena Williams survived. But her story raises a very important question. If someone with Serena Williams's resources, knowledge, status, and visibility can struggle to have her own concerns heard, then what happens to women who have fewer resources and less power? What happens to them? The answer is that many of them will never make the headlines. Many will simply become another statistic that I will be talking about, that advocates would be talking about. Another area where we see disparities emerge is uterine fibroids. I talk about this all the time. Fibroids are incredibly common, but Black women are more likely to develop them, and they're more likely to develop them at younger ages, and they're more likely to experience severe symptoms. And yet many women spend years being told that debilitating bleeding, severe pain, and life-disrupting symptoms are simply a part of just being a woman. That's what they'll be told. And one of the most frustrating things about women's health is how often suffering becomes normalized. Pain becomes normal. Heavy bleeding becomes normal. Fatigue becomes normal. And once suffering is normalized, guess what? Investigation often stops. They're not investigating the pain anymore. Why would they? And I think that's one of the places where misogyny and racism can intersect in particularly harmful ways. Because when a group is already at risk of having their pain underestimated because they are a woman, and then another group is already at risk of having their pain underestimated because of racial bias, then those effects can compound. And that's something that we cannot ignore. This is what people mean when they talk about this lovely word that we we call intersectionality. And it's something that I feel like people throw around without understanding what the hell intersectionality actually is. This is it. This is a perfect example. Racial bias and medical misogyny meeting together and compounding and affecting Black women as such alarming rates. And this can be compounded yet again when there's a Black woman with a disability, when there's a trans woman, because there's already bias towards trans women and harm towards trans women. There's already bias and harm towards disabled women. There's already harm and bias towards Muslim women and hijabi women. And so when you start taking these oppressive factors and start putting them together, now you are in a place where these effects are compounded together, and it's dangerous. Intersectionality is not about ranking oppression. And that makes me really irritated because a lot of people think it's about deciding who has it worse, but it's not about any of that. It's about recognizing that different forms of discrimination can overlap and interact with one another and compound. A Black woman doesn't experience racism one day and then sexism the next. She experiences both simultaneously. And when researchers study healthcare outcomes, those overlapping experiences matter and show up in research. Like, that's what's important too. This isn't opinion-based. This isn't ideology or a theory. This is fact. This shows up in research. There is also another concept that deserves attention here, and it's called weathering. And I think a lot of people don't talk about weathering, and I wanted to highlight it because weathering is so important. Weathering is a theory that suggests chronic exposure to stress, discrimination, and adversity can create cumulative physiological wear and tear on the body over time. And when we experience stress, our bodies release hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which most people know about. And those responses are incredibly useful in short bursts. But when stress becomes chronic, the physiological consequences can become very significant. Researchers have explored whether chronic exposure to discrimination, particularly like racial discrimination, may contribute to accelerated biological aging and poorer health outcomes. So this doesn't mean that discrimination is the sole explanation for every disparity, but it does highlight something that's very important. And it's that health is not determined solely by genetics. Health is not determined solely by personal choices. Health is influenced by environments in which people live in, work in, learn in, and seek care in. And as someone who spends so much of her life educating women about vaginal health, I think about this more times than I can tell you guys. I think about this all the time. And I want to say too that I think about this a lot because I don't know how many people know this. I really do keep my personal life and my business life like very separate. But my boyfriend is a Black man and I have family that are Black women. Daniel, my boyfriend, his mother, my mother-in-law, his aunts, they're my aunties. Like they are Black women. That Daniel's family is Black. They are Black women. They are African American women that I care about so deeply. My mother-in-law goes to an appointment and I'm like, call me, tell me everything that they tell you so that I can make sure that I can advocate for you. I can help you ask the right questions. I do this for my own mom and my own family, but I also do this for Daniel's family and the women in Daniel and I's life that are Black women. I have family that are Black and I love them dearly. And with my man being a Black man, I know that I will be having Black children someday. And it means a lot to me to advocate for this. And this isn't just like, oh, I'm dating a Black person. It's the sole reason I care. I care because I'm a human and I'm not a racist piece of shit, obviously. And I feel like it shouldn't take having Black friends or dating a Black person to understand this and care about this. But I've grown up in an area where 90% was either Hispanic or Black. So I grew up around people of color my whole life. I am a person of color. I'm a Syrian American woman. So like I grew up Middle Eastern, grew up solely around people of color. I guess like as a child, I just like could not fathom the idea that racism in medicine was a thing. Like my head would not be able to wrap around that because it's something that never made sense to me because I grew up in such a diverse environment. My childhood best friends, shout out to Denise and Jayla, but Jayla's a Black woman, Denise is a Dominican woman. I always grew up around women of color. My earliest childhood friends are women of color and a Black woman. And so I just could not fathom the idea that that's something that they experience. And so when I got older and you start learning and becoming educated, you realize, oh my God, the system is so effed. The system is so messed up. And Racism is so deeply rooted in these systems, including medicine, including gynecology, and it lit a fire under my ass, full transparency, that I was like, I care about vaginal health for everyone, and I care about female reproductive health for everyone. And learning about this just like irritated the hell out of me. Like, I was like, I cannot believe that this was a thing when I was young. And so advocating for better outcomes for everyone is so important to me. And highlighting Juneteenth and talking about the disparities that Black women face is so important to me, because at my core, I care about it. And I also acknowledge, like, I have family who are Black women that I love deeply and care about so deeply, and want to make sure that they are safe and protected. And so this essentially comes back to how it's easy to focus exclusively on individual behavior, like how I see people doing that in society. They ask like Black women and Black patients, like, what supplements are you taking? What are you eating? How are you exercising? What products are you using? And those questions obviously, like, they matter, but health is bigger than individual behavior. That's something that I grew up knowing almost immediately. Health exists within systems. And if we genuinely want to improve women's health outcomes, we have to be willing to examine both, not just one. One of the reasons that I wanted to make this episode for Juneteenth is because I think conversations about racism in medicine are often misunderstood. Sometimes people assume that acknowledging historical harm somehow diminishes the incredible advancements medicine has achieved. And it pisses me off, because I would argue the complete opposite. The willingness to examine mistakes is what makes science stronger, period. Like, I feel like that is an undeniable fact. Medicine has corrected countless false assumptions throughout history. We abandoned bloodletting. We improved surgical sterility. We changed our understanding of hormones. We changed our understanding of infectious disease, for example. We changed our understanding of genetics. Scientific progression requires humility. I don't know who needs to hear that, but I think people need to hear that. It requires humility, because the goal is not guilt. That same humility should apply when we're discussing race, gender, and healthcare. Again, the goal is not guilt, because I feel like white people pretend or try to act like we are trying to say, you guys need to feel guilty forever. That's not the goal. The goal is accuracy. That's the goal. The goal is accuracy. The goal is understanding why disparities exist so that we can reduce them, because we care about these people. And ultimately, the goal should be better care for everyone. I'm looking dead in the camera saying that. The goal should be better care for everyone. Period. Point blank. There should not be this like, oh, but what about this? What? The goal is better care for everyone. And I think people need to understand that. If people jump to, are you trying to say white people should feel bad forever? You've missed the point. You missed the point, because I see those comments all the time where people are like, that was the past. Like, let's move on. No, let's acknowledge it. You shouldn't feel bad for acknowledging history and acknowledging the past. That's ultimately the goal. Better care for everyone. And as we celebrate Juneteenth, I think that it's worth remembering that freedom is not simply about laws. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. Freedom is about dignity. It's about being fully seen as a human being. It's about having your pain acknowledged. It's about having your concerns taken seriously. It's about having access to healthcare that recognizes your humanity rather than forcing you to fight to prove it. The story of racism in gynecology is not simply a story about the past. That's what I'm trying to say the last 20 minutes. It's a story about whose voices are heard, whose pain is believed, whose suffering is investigated, and whose health outcomes society chooses to prioritize. Because history does not have to be alive to leave fingerprints. And if we truly care about women's health, then understanding those fingerprints is not optional. It is a part of the work that we all need to get behind. So that was today's episode. It was essentially a rant, but I think that a lot of people will appreciate this. And if you didn't know any of this, I hope that this was informative and educational, because that's always my goal. I want to educate people. So I really hope that this was educational and informative. I spent a lot of time gathering my thoughts, putting this together in a way that flowed so that I could really talk about this in a way that made sense and in a way that truly highlights my passion. And today was like a day where I just took the time to kind of put together my thoughts and information dump. So I really hope that you guys did enjoy this. And I really hope that you guys think about this for the remainder of your day and you advocate for better healthcare for everyone. And in today's episode, we were highlighting Black women. And to all the Black women who watch my content and support me and show me love, I love you guys so very much. Happy Juneteenth to everyone, and especially the Black African Americans here in this country. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.